everyone to our special webinar today. My name is Amber and I will be your host. Today we're going to be talking about the relationship between executive function and academic success. So it looks like we have a large group here today, so I'm super excited to share this information with you today. Just a couple of things before we get started. We are recording this webinar, so you will be able to share this at the end of the webinar. We will send out an email, and that way you can share it with other colleagues. You can share it with parents. Our parents and our nonprofits that are online, you can share it with your colleagues and teachers as well. So really, we wanted to provide that information for you. This is geared towards educators. However, there is a lot of great information for nonprofits and parents as well. So just wanted to kind of give you that heads up, but definitely stick with us. It's some great information. Also, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So you'll see the chat box, you have that option. And if at any time you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We do have a lot of information to get through today. So I am going to try to get to those questions as best as I can as I go throughout the presentation today. But we do have time at the end where we can have a Q&A. So if I don't get to your question, don't worry. I'm going to keep a list of them and I will definitely touch base with it at the end. Just a little bit more about myself. My name is Amber and I have 15 years of experience working with underserved communities, with nonprofits and higher education. So I spent a lot of my career implementing and building and managing programs to help individuals with academic success and success to really help move them up. The last 10 years of my career, I've spent doing grant writing because, you know, it's so important for us to be able to pay for these projects that we want to implement. So I've spent a lot of time doing research, grant writing, and grant managing. So just a little bit about myself. So we'll go ahead and get started today. So today's agenda, we're going to be covering what is executive function, our relationship between executive function and academic success, and then ways to help you pay for this. So we're really going to encompass all of that today. So when I first talk about executive function, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a little hand. And I just wanted to kind of get an idea of where everybody's level of understanding is with executive function. So if you've heard the term executive function before, why don't you go ahead and hit that hand down at the bottom? And that way we can see where everybody's at. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. It looks like about 60% of the individuals here online are familiar with executive function. So we'll go ahead just and touch base on it for some of our individuals that it's a new term for, because we want to make sure that everybody gets the most out of this webinar today. So we're going to touch just a little bit on executive function. So when I talk about executive function, you can really think of it as like the CEO of the brain, okay? It helps us plan, prioritize, organize, helps us avoid procrastination. And we also find that individuals, children and adults with ADHD often have weak executive function. Attitude Magazine shared with us that about 90% of kids with ADHD struggle with executive function. Now, this just means they have their wiring in their brain is weak. They don't have that stronger wiring that some of the rest of us have. But the great news is that we know with neuroplasticity, our brains are moldable, they're shapeable. And so with the right cognitive training and feedback and behavioral shaping, that we can help strengthen that executive function. We can help make that executive function strong and rebuild that in their brain. So when I talk a little bit more about executive function, I'm really specifically talking about mental skills that help us get things done. Okay, so some of the different things that executive function helps us with are inhibition. Okay, so when you don't have inhibition, that's really where you have that impulsivity. Okay, you have that ability where you're not able to stop and think before you act. Okay, and so impulsivity can show up in a lot of different ways when we're working with students, right? Some of our students have behavioral issues and they're very apparent. But some of the students that we're working with, it may show up where they're rushing to get their assignment done first, and then they're making a lot of mistakes. And it can also show up with some of our students where they are working to, or they'll call out something, or they'll bring up a topic when we're in the middle of working on something else, because they have so much going on in their mind. They just need to get it out. They don't have that ability to stop and think before they act. So we really want to help strengthen that inhibition so that they do have that self-regulation. Another thing that we want to talk about with this is, you may have a student where that it does have a lot of issues with impulsivity, and they will, they'll do something wrong, and you'll have the conversation about it. There'll be consequences, and they totally understand what's wrong and what they did wrong. But 5 minutes later, they do it again. And it's because they lack that mental skill. Can any of you relate to that? Do any of you have students? Go ahead and raise your hand if that's something that you can relate to. Yeah, it looks like some of you you do relate to that. So definitely that is something we hear, and that's something that we work with students. So we want to strengthen that. Shift. So that's another skill that we want to work on, and that's really our ability to move freely from one task to another. Often we run into students where they get hyper-focused on something. They get very interested and very excited in something, and then they hyper-focus on it. So it makes it very difficult for them to have that flexibility to move from one task to another. So we really want to strengthen that. We want them to be able to have that flexibility and to be able to move freely from one thing to another. Sometimes we even see there's a comorbidity between ADHD and perfectionism. And, that sounds strange, and it sounds like, well, how can you be a perfectionist if you have ADHD? Well, it happens so often because they're so afraid they're going to get something wrong. So they take a lot of time on one task because they don't want to move to the next one because they want to get it right. So that's one thing that we see that makes it difficult for them. Sometimes it's hard for them to switch from one task to another as well, because they're on one task for so long because they're getting very distracted. So definitely something we want to work on and improve. Emotional control. And that's really our ability to put rational thoughts on feelings. So you'll often have students that'll have emotional outbursts off something that does not seem like it's a major deal to us, but they're struggling to put that rational thought on there. And it could be an emotional outburst, or it could even be where they're overly sensitive to feedback and maybe even positive feedback, but they dwell on it and it's hard for them to move on. And when we think of emotional control, really, you need to be able to pay attention to the situation. You need to be able to control your impulses. You need to be able to process the situation and then have a response. And for children with ADHD, this is very difficult for them to do. So we really want to build that executive function for them so they can have those rational thoughts and they can move freely through things. Initiation. So that's really our ability to start a task independently. And we'll run into this a lot of times where we talk to parents and other teachers, and we work with students too, that 15 minutes of homework takes 2 hours because they need to be redirected, or they need initial directions a lot in the beginning. So they need a lot of direction in the beginning, and then they consistently need redirection because they're looking out the window, or they're fidgeting, or whatever the case may be. They can't continue through that task to complete it. This is another thing where you'll see perfectionism, where they don't want to start the task because they don't want to get it wrong. So they won't start the task, and then it doesn't get done, and then there's negative consequences to that. So this is another skill that we want to work on. Working memory. So there's a lot of different aspects when we talk about working memory, but what we're wanting to do here is be able to process information and come out with a solution. So that can be comprehension, a solution where, like a math problem, where we're taking information in and we're processing it and we're coming up with a solution. This can mean spatial memory, so where things are located. So if you have students that lose things a lot, they can't find their library book, things like this, they're struggling with their working memory. And even multi-step processing. How often are we working with children with ADHD and we say, open your books to page 5, grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, and let's get started. And they maybe get their book out, but then they don't know the rest of what they should do. So really work on building that working memory so we can strengthen that and they can function on the day-to-day for that. Planning and organizing and organization of materials. So if we're working with kindergartners, we don't see this as much, but that doesn't mean it's not a very valuable skill that we need to learn, because as we progress academically and into the workforce, this is something that just is essential for us to be able to function. And this is being able to take information, to break it down, to be able to complete it, and to be able to turn it in on time. And if we can't do that, we can't function academically and we can't function in the workforce. Okay, so this is something that, when we talk with parents or teachers that have young ones, they don't see this as much. But as they progress and we talk to adolescents and work with adolescents, this is something that's making them fall further and further behind amongst their peers. So such a valuable tool. And then self-monitoring. And this is really our ability to to monitor our own performance against what's expected of us. And so often we work with students that know they're not performing where they should be, but they don't know how to get there. They don't know the steps and they don't have the tools. So that's what we want to do. We want to build that executive function so they have the tools and they can work, they can do the day-to-day and they can get through those next steps. But now that we know about executive function, what is really the relationship between executive function and school success? How do those two relate together? Well, recently there was an article posted in Science Daily. Now, we've done a blog post about a month or two ago about this. So if you would like to see that blog after we're done with the webinar, all you have to do in the chat box is type blog, and we'll make sure that you get that article when we're done here today. But there was an article posted in Science Daily, and it was the University of Exeter, and they included research from the University College of London. And what they were researching is non-medication measures to support children with ADHD. So they were looking at different ways that they could help children with ADHD become more successful academically, okay? So there were some very major results that came out of this study. Number one, they reviewed 28 randomized controls. So they looked at a lot of different trials and wanted to make sure that they were looking at a lot of different information, okay? And they found, one of the main things that they found is 5% of children within their studies had ADHD. Now, if you've worked with individuals and children with ADHD, you know that that is a very low number. But to put it in context, 5% of children with ADHD means at least one child in every classroom is suffering from ADHD. So that really puts it in perspective that as teachers in the classroom, we are dealing with this day in and day out. So we really need to help put interventions in place to help us with those students and help them reach the potential that we know that they can be at. And they also found that students with ADHD had difficulty paying attention. They had difficulty with controlling their impulses, and they had difficulty with their self-regulation. And really looking back at what we just talked about with executive function, and then talking about inability to pay attention and controlling our impulses and self-regulation, and that's really links weak executive function to ADHD. That's really where we see the fact that when they have that weak executive function, when they're not struggling, they're having ADHD and they're struggling in school. So really, it did find that that link was together, and that, that we are dealing with a lot of children that are suffering with this. But how do we fix it? What interventions can we put in place to help these students day in and day out? So there were three main things that they found through all of their studies and all of their research that they did. And one was daily report cards, because daily report cards give students that immediate feedback that's necessary for them to be able to help build that self-regulation, to understand what went well and what areas they need to work on. Because if you're dealing with the student, whether they have ADHD, whether they have ADD, or whether they just have weak executive function, if you tell them last week you did this, that's really hard for them to comprehend, one, and then number two, build that self-regulation. So we really need to be giving them those daily feedbacks of what is going well and areas that they need to work on. The second thing was goal setting. They found that it was so important for us to help set goals because that way they have something to consistently work towards. Now, of course, as we know with goal setting, we need to make sure they're manageable, and we need to make sure that we're setting up steps on how we're going to reach those goals. Okay, so, it's easy to just say, I want to do this by the end of the year, but if we don't have a plan in place, that's not going to help. So goal setting with that plan of action of how you're going to help them reach their goals. Okay. And then reward structures. We want to have those reward structures in place because we want to have that positive impact on them. We want to reward them for the positivity that they're doing. We want to build that self-regulation. We want to give them those positive feedback and that positive feeling of when they're doing well, so they get that on a consistent basis. Okay, so now the important thing that these three things are done in a one-to-one session, because they need to be very customizable for each of the student, because one student's daily report card is going to look totally different than another student's daily report card. So we really need to make sure that we're doing these three things, but we're doing these three things individualized and on a one-to-one basis. So really, that was the key takeaway, because there's not a one size fits all when we're talking about ADHD, ADD, attention difficulties. There's never going to be a one size fits all. So one aspect, and this is a huge, this is a big quote, but what I want you to take away from it is Professor Ford was one of the researchers that was involved during all of these studies and reviewing all of these trials. And the biggest takeaway from Professor Ford was daily report cards. They're going to continue to do research on ADHD. And we know every day, every year we're coming out with new things and we're learning so much about ADHD and executive function. But their biggest takeaway is the daily report cards, because that's what's helping build that self-regulation, giving them that immediate feedback and the day-to-day. Okay. And then the other big takeaway from Professor Ford was the one-to-one delivery, because again, there's not a one size fits all. We need to really work on each student as an individual. Okay. And we are learning that even in education. The way that we used to teach 30 years ago is drastically different than the way we're teaching now. We know that students learn so differently. And so we need to be able to go to the level that they're at to really help them. And that's what we're doing here with students with ADHD. We're going to their level and we're helping them build that, that self-regulation and strengthen that executive function so they can reach that potential. So, as an educator, you're probably thinking right now, okay, that's great. So I need to do goal setting. I need to do daily report cards, and I need to, do a reward structure. How am I going to do that? I have, I'm dealing with 200 students. There's no way that I can build a program like that that's customizable. And then the data tracking alone can take take all your time away from the actual coaching that you really want to do with these students. And that's how here at Play Attention, we can help. Because Play Attention, we incorporate all of the successful interventions that were cited in the study. Now, some of you are very familiar with Play Attention and our system. Some of you are not. So I'm not going to go into very much detail of Play Attention. I'm going to discuss the interventions that we incorporate. But if you want to do a demo or a consultation to learn more about Play Attention, we would love to do that for you. So again, all you need to do is type demo or consultation in the chat box, and we will make sure that we get that set up with you so that you can have more understanding of how Play Attention can work specifically for you, because that's really what our goal is here. Every client we have, their program's customized to their specific needs. So it's really important. So again, if you want to learn more about Play Attention, please just share that below or type that in the chat box that you want to do a demo or a consultation, and we definitely can do that for you. But the reason why, the ways that Play Attention incorporates all of these interventions is, first of all, we do one-to-one sessions. So when you're working with Play Attention with a student, it's going to be one-to-one. It's going to be the Play Attention session and the coach. And the great thing, and we'll talk more about coaching, but you have a lot of options of who you can use as a coach. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, I have 200 students myself. How can I coach all of them? And we'll talk through different ways that you can do that. Okay. And then we teach self-regulation. So our goal here in the foundation of Play Attention is we want to strengthen that executive function. We know that with the right training that we can build that executive function and we can build that self-regulation. So we do that through a three-part system. We have our cognitive training, we have our integrated feedback technology through our body wave armband, and the behavioral shaping program. So we take all areas of teaching and put those together to really help build that self-regulation. We have report cards. So we have report cards for students as well as for teachers and parents. We do goal setting, and we also have rewards. So we're going to go into each one of these specifically and talk a little bit about them. And that way that will help you in looking or seeing how Play Attention can really help incorporate all of these in a program for you. So when we talk about neurocognitive training, so just a little feedback, just a little background for those that you aren't familiar with Play Attention. I mentioned we're the only program that integrates that advanced feedback technology necessary to build that executive function and self-regulation. We have the most advanced brain activity monitoring device. We have randomized clinical control studies that were validated and conducted by Tufts University Medical School. And again, if this is something you want after the webinar, just type Tufts study in the chat box, and we'll make sure that those studies, you get those studies. And then the brain is able to become a mouse or a joystick throughout the games through our body wave armband. And that was inspired by NASA technology. So really it gives them that, that feeling, and it brings attention to the forefront. They're able to see it and it becomes tangible. When we talk about attention's a very abstract idea, right? It's not anything that we can touch. It's not anything that we can see. And so it's so difficult for our students. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced this. You ask one of your students, are you paying attention? And they'll say, I am. And they're not paying attention. So if you ever experienced that, raise your hand, because we've run into a lot of that with teachers, with the students we work with parents that, they say, I know they're not paying attention. They're telling me they are, but we all know that they're not. They're off in their own world, or they're there, but I know they're not there 100%. And that's because so often they don't understand what it means to pay attention. And so with our body wave armband, we're able to make attention concrete and controllable. And they're able to see their attention in real time, and they're able to manipulate the characters on the screen with just their attention alone. So that's a huge aha moment for so many of our students, because they can see it, they can feel it, and that helps them learn. Okay. So when we talk a little bit more about Play Attention specifically and how we help with all of the interventions listed through the study, we have one-on-one sessions, like I mentioned earlier. So the student will have the body wave armband on, and you will see that here, right here on the screen. So they'll have that body wave armband on, and they'll be working in conjunction with the cognitive training. Okay, so they're working together on that. And then there'll be a coach with them. Now, the coach can be the teacher. The coach can be a counselor. The coach can be a teacher assistant, a paraprofessional. You can even train a parent volunteer to be a coach. So really, we help work with you on who you want to have be your coaches, because we know it takes a village, right? One teacher, as I mentioned, can be assigned, hundreds of students, depending on if you're working with multiple schools, what your district looks like. So we really make it so it can be functionable for you and customizable for you. Each student will have their own user login. So this makes it very customizable for each of your students. You have the ability to put their name in, they'll have their own username, their own login. You can indicate whether it's a male or a female, if they're a child or a teen. So if you're working with elementary as well as middle school or high schoolers, you can differentiate that as you're setting up your sessions. And also you have a lot of options on the side as well. So, you can have your journal enabled, and that means that at the end of each session, your students will have the ability to do a journal entry. And that really helps with that self-reflection, because it asks them, what did I do well and what can I work on? So really helping reinforce that fact of, number one, they're doing something positive, but what areas can they work on as well? So again, more like a daily report card. They have the ability for your bank enabled, stars enabled, and rating scales. Those all work in conjunction with our goals and rewards, and we'll talk about those. And then you have the ability to always create Sheer Genius session enabled. And what Sheer Genius is it's our artificial intelligence, and it does all of the hard lifting for you, especially, as teachers in the classroom. Data tracking can be the biggest nightmare. You want to teach, you want to work with those students, but when you have that data tracking and you're pulling student files, it really takes away from that. So this gives you that ability to have Sheer Genius do that heavy lifting for you. So it will help you determine, once you get the login set up, and here's what I mean specifically. Oh, let me go back one. It'll be in another slide. We'll talk specifically how we set up the games, but it'll give you that ability to set up games. And then once you have those games set up, Sheer Genius will then determine what games each student will play based on their performance from last time. It will also give you all of their data as soon as they're done. So it really takes the heavy lifting out of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about the data that it provides. Okay. And then it teaches self-regulation through our cognitive skill training. So here's all the games that we have available. Again, I'm not going to go into each of them specifically, but if that's something you want, just let us know there in the chat, and we will definitely be able to set that up for you. But each of the games addresses impulsivity, addresses attention, and it addresses processing speed. So every game that you play with and play attention is going to touch on those cognitive skills. However, each of the games then work on something different. So we have short-term memory, time on task, visual tracking. So they all touch a little bit differently on different cognitive skills. For example, attention stamina, that really helps sustain our attention at will. So being able to pay attention to longer and longer periods of time, similar to a teacher in the classroom. So that character is going to start out at the top of the ocean. Now the student's going to be, logged into their profile. They're going to have that body wave armband on, and that character is going to start out at the top of the ocean. And as soon as they're focused and paying attention, they're going to be able to move that character down to the bottom of the ocean with just their attention alone. And that's what we mean by that immediate feedback technology. They are able to see their attention in real time. It makes it concrete and controllable. And the goal is to keep that character down at the bottom of the ocean. But at any time, if they start to lose that focus because they're daydreaming, they're being distracted, they have self-distracting behaviors, that character is going to start to move back up to the top of the ocean. Again, giving them that immediate feedback that they're now no longer paying attention. Okay, I did have a question, and it says, Christina asked, social skills game is also advisable for autism. Yes, the social skills, we work with a lot of individuals that have autism and individuals that are on the spectrum, and a lot of them like our social skills game because it really helps build that. We work with a lot of individuals that struggle socially because they miss the shake of the head. They miss those social cues. So we really work with them to learn those expressions and to learn those cues and really help coach them through what they look like. And it even allows you to pause the game so you can really have a one-on-one interaction with the student of, okay, in this scenario, what are some things that you would say? And what are some things that maybe you don't want to say? So it really does help with that. So great question. We also, this is the slide that I was looking for earlier. So when you set up your user profile for each of your students, you're going to be able to select the games here that you want in their profile. Okay, so you can, as I mentioned, and as we've talked about in depth now, is there's not a one size fits all. So this really helps you customize the games specifically, because again, you might have, one student, even when you're talking about kindergarten or middle school, they're different, but even two kindergartners are not going to be the same. Some may be really great with visual tracking, but maybe struggling with that time on task. So again, very customizable. And then once you set this up, Sheer Genius is then going to determine what games need to be played. So it really makes it hands off. We also teach self-regulation through behavioral shaping. So, we talked about our cognitive training, our three-part system. So our cognitive training, our integrated feedback technology through our body wave armband, and then behavioral shaping. So often we run into students that have self-distracting behaviors. Okay, so we have students that call out in classroom, fidget, bite their nails, chew on their pencil. And we know that when they have these self-distracting behaviors, they're not able to pay attention. So we've built this into the system as well to help build that self-regulation. And the way that you're going to use this is you're going to get a whiteboard that is going to have 19 different self-distracting behaviors on there. And when you're working individually one-on-one with your student and they have one of these behaviors, whether it be calling out, biting on their nails, or if they have several of them, you're going to make marks on that sheet. And at the end of the session, Sheer Genius is going to allow you to enter those into their profile. And then that is going to start working towards the goals that we'll talk about later. So Sheer Genius will help to start build goal setting around these self-distracting behaviors as well. Because we know there's a one-to-one correlation between these behaviors and paying attention, right? Because when I am calling out, I'm not able to pay attention to what's going on. But so often the students that we're working with, they don't understand that. Number one, they may not realize they're doing it at all, or they don't realize they're doing it as often as they are. So it really helps create those teachable moments for us. So for example, if you're playing attention stamina, and they've got that character moved down to the bottom of the ocean, and it's down at the bottom, and they're focused in and paying attention, and then they yell, "I like SpaghettiOs," that character is going to start to move back up to the top of the ocean. And that's going to give them that immediate feedback that they called out and they weren't able to pay attention, that one-to-one correlation and that teachable moment. So then at the end of the game, you can have that moment with them and explain to them, okay, so what happened when you called out? Well, I couldn't pay attention. So it really helps build that self-regulation. So this is a really integral piece as well that we offer within Play Attention. Immediate feedback. So that was one of the important things that the interventions that the study discussed was immediate feedback. And Play Attention gives the students immediate feedback. As soon as they're done playing a game, they're going to know what their attention percentage was, how long they played the game, could they finish the game, if they had any impulsive strikes, if they had anything incorrect, it's going to be all right there. And then it'll also show their behaviors as well. So this really gives them that immediate feedback of how they did, okay? And then we also have the ability to do report cards for parents or teachers or whoever else is interested in helping the student. So we call it our circle of success. And, this really helps us because as we're working with certain students and we're implementing things, we want other teachers or parents to be able to support them and implement those things as well. So we've created the circle of success. And the great thing about that is when you set up their user profile, you can put all of their information in, and then you can email their results to them directly. So you don't have to look up their file. You don't have to look up that information. It's right there in front of you. As soon as you get done with the session, you can pass that information along. And it really helps build that connection because just like everything, the more consistent we are, the better results that we're going to have. Okay. And you can give them their report card data. So I talked about Sheer Genius and all the great things that it does. Sheer Genius tracks all of the data for you. Okay, so there's no manual data tracking that you're going to have to do. So here's an example of one of the reports that it does. Now you can send the reports to your circle of success directly, or you can always download these reports in a PDF, or a CSV file as well. So very user-friendly and able to get the information where you need it to go. But you're able to look at different games, what their attention was, how long that they played, what their behaviors were. So it gives you a lot of great information. You can also correlate the data. So you can look at attention and duration over all of the games over a period of time. And it takes all of the data as they're going. So you have that data progression as well. So I talked with a speech pathologist the other day at a school, and she's like, I know I'm making progress, but I don't know how to track my data and show it. And really, she thinks that our tool here, Play Attention, will be very useful in helping with that comorbidity for her specific situation of the speech and the attention difficulties. And, not only was it, the full package, but the fact that they don't have to do that manual tracking. And it's so helpful because they're working with so many students. Okay, goal setting. So another one of the interventions that Play Attention offers. So goal setting. So the great thing about goal setting is Sheer Genius does that for you. Again, so here, if you look at my screen here, you'll see here today's game goal. So at the end of each session, they'll have all of their information. It'll be their instant report card. But then when they go to play that game next session, they're going to see all of their data from before, but they're also going to start to see goals. And Sheer Genius is going to set up those goals for you. Okay, so they're going to set up those goals for, okay, this one says play for at least 5 minutes and 13 seconds. So they weren't able to complete the game last time. So Sheer Genius is going to try to push them a little bit further in the game. Some other goals could be, okay, last time you had 50% of attention. Let's try for 55% this time. But also they're going to build goals for the behaviors as well. So if they called out 10 times last time, it's going to say, okay, last time you called out 10 times, let's try for 9. So really all of the goals are manageable, but they're making goals and they're making progress. Okay, that's a good question. I got a question about the release of information for those on the circle of success to share. That's definitely something that we can talk about offline. But yeah, we will touch base about that. And so remind me about that later, and you and I can touch base about the release of information. Okay, so now rewards. So the goal settings work in conjunction with our rewards program. So the great thing about our rewards program, you'll see on the screen some rewards, and these are ones that have been created for some of our students, and they are all customizable. So you can create whatever rewards you want, because as we all know, if we're working with kindergartners and middle schoolers, those rewards are going to be different, but you can create a bunch of generic ones and then some specific ones that you can assign specifically to certain students. So it's really a great way, and you can make them 1 point, you can make them 500 points. And what this really helps with as well is that instant gratification. We are all in a society right now of where we love instant gratification. So this really helps build that self-regulation, because when we have that instant gratification, we're not performing that self-regulation. So this helps with that as well. Initially you're going to have some students that are going to say, I have a point, I'm going to spend it. But as they progress, they're going to be able to save up those and, get bigger rewards. And that helps them as well. Also, if you want to work with parents specific, if you have a group that wants to donate rewards as well, definitely can be very customizable. So it really works great, but it really helps build that positivity and builds that positive reinforcement that we know from studies really helps build that executive function and help with that school success. Okay, so here's a great analogy we love, or a slide that we love to show. And I'm sure you've all seen the analogy before. What's on top of the iceberg is totally different than what we see before. But when we want to see school success, when we want to help build executive function, when we want to help with ADHD, we want our students to do all of the things on the top of the iceberg, right? We want them to learn, read, listen, think, not fidget, keep still, remember, pay attention, and problem solve. But really, we need to have them be able to do all of the cognitive skills on the bottom of the iceberg, right? We want them to be able to do all of those, and Play Attention does address all of those different things. Okay, I got another question here. Yes, you can put goals in with student IEPs. We have recently, a couple months ago, we did a special webinar on play attention and IEPs and really how those work together. So I can definitely send you that webinar as well, so you can see a little bit more. But yes, it can be customizable that way, where you can put in specific goals for your student's IEP and really help them move forward with that. So great question. So, now that we've talked about, that goal setting, report cards, and reward systems, all in a customizable program, all in a one-to-one, really is what students need to help with that academic success. And we've talked about how, the different ways that play attention can really help with those through our different interventions that are built in. What does a play attention package look like? So we have our neurocognitive training, so our cognitive training games. We have the body wave armband, that NASA-inspired technology. We have the full behavioral shaping program that really helps build that self-regulation. A personal executive functions coach, okay? They have, personal executive functions coach is going to be assigned to you, and they're going to be there every step of the way, okay? And so, as soon as, if you use a system, if your school uses a system for 10 years, 15 years, you're always going to have the support of that executive function or that executive functions coach. They're initially going to do a tutorial with you to help you get set up. But then after that, they are there for you as much as you need. Unlimited user license. As a professional, you're going to be able to enroll as many students as you want into your program, okay? And so our system is a one-time payment of $2,495, okay? So that gets you all of the things that we talk about here. We also have the ability, now this of course does the one-to-one training, so we're working with one student at a time. Now we do have a version of called iLab where we can do small group or even distance coaching, but again, that's something we can talk about at a later date. So if that's something you're interested, we can always have those discussions. So really, so Christina asked self-regulation monitoring based on heart rate and skin conductance. Actually, what we're doing here is the body wave armband, your brain gives off a specific signature indicative to attention, okay? So we like to call it here an attention signature, but when your neurons are all firing at once in your brain, you give off this signature. And our body wave technology is able to pick up that signature through sensors on the back of the body wave armband, okay? So it's actually picking up that brain activity indicative to attention, okay? So good question. All right, so now, when we talk about the system, for a lot of your budgets, $25.95 is an affordable price point. It's something that you can fit into your budget. It's something that, is something that will work very well for you. For some of you, it may not. So how can we pay for those? What are some of the things that we can do? And I went one too many slides. Let me back up one. So when we're talking about funding assistance, there are different areas that we can go into when we're talking about funding assistance. Now, one thing I want you to know, I'm going to preface this, what I talk to you about now, that I'm looking specifically, or some of it's generalized, and then the state funding is specifically for North Carolina, because that's where we're based out of. However, I would be more than happy to talk to each of you individually about your specific state or your specific situation in terms of funding. So if you want to have a discussion later on via phone, email, whatever you choose about funding, just put that, put funding in the chat box, and we'll reach out to you to talk specifically about, what options you might have in your area for funding. So when I'm talking about funding assistance, really it being an affordable price point of $24.95, your best bet is probably going to be local fundraisers and local community foundations. And the reason why I say that is because when you're working with local fundraisers and local community foundations, there's not as much regulations. There's not as much reporting. When we get into state and federal grants, there's a lot of reporting. So you're saving yourself time and not doing data tracking on the system. but you need to track how you're spending your money. So there's usually a lot less red tape, a lot less reporting and regulations with your local fundraisers, local community foundations. So that's always our recommendation of when you start out looking for funding assistance. But you do have the option of state grants, and you do have the option of special ed funds. Okay, so when we get a little bit more into the local fundraisers, so when I talk about local fundraise, what I mean, PTO, PTA, right? A lot of us have very active PTO, PTA organizations. They really strive to make things work well for the teachers, to really give the teachers the tools they need. So this is one avenue to do a fundraiser with them specifically. Sponsorships. Maybe you have individuals in the community or businesses in the community that can't give you the full amount of money, but they'd like to sponsor a student at $100. Okay, so $100, you're talking 25 students and you've paid for your system, right? So same with scholarships. If you have community members or you have businesses, this would be a great avenue for you to go down. And then just a regular fundraiser. I like to share this example. My son is on the high school swim team, and we just recently did the stay-at-home fundraiser. And some of you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's a fundraiser that basically allows you to donate money without having to do anything. And our parents loved it. So, $25, and I don't have to sell that wrapping paper, right? $50, and I don't have to do a bake sale or a car wash, whatever the case may be. But in just 1 month, we were able to raise $1,400. Okay, so that's over half the price of what our system costs. And really, it was a lot smaller pool that you would have than some of your other fundraisers. So I like to use that example because, we really didn't do a whole lot of legwork, and we were able to raise a decent amount of money for our swim team. So always that option of doing a fundraiser like this. So I have a question about Christina. We'll talk more about Christina had a question about working with a university and funding options through that. You and I can talk about that offline. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. Definitely, that's a good question. And then Sabrina, can parents buy this package, or is it only for schools? No, we can talk about that at the end, that there are other options for the parents that are online, that you can purchase this as a home user as well. So we'll touch base about that at the end. So local community foundations, organizations. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking a little bit more about city foundations, county foundations. So a lot of times our city and county foundations are willing to do small grants, $2,500 to $5,000 for educational tools for their community. So that's a great avenue to go down. And most of those are open all the time. So there's no deadlines. You can put a package together. You can even do a presentation for them. Kiwanis, Legion, Women's Federation, etc. Again, that might not be something where you can get your full amount, but a way for you to go to start raising money. United Way. If you have any partnerships with United Way in your schools, okay, so if you have those relationships, it's definitely an avenue to go down, because a lot of times United Way has funds that are available, or they can help you access other funds. Community action agencies, Head Start organizations, and really any partnerships that you have within your organization. Anybody that you have can be a potential partner to help you with this, especially if they're community-based. And then state grants. So again, this is very specific to North Carolina. So the link on the bottom, I did a search in North Carolina, and some of the avenues that we have, basically I was looking on the State Board of Education. Okay, so there's different areas in North Carolina, and really they're pretty common state after state, but again, we can have those conversations. But dropout prevention, when we're helping students reach their maximum success and potential, we have less likeliness of dropout. So, there's funds available for that. Educational assistance and training programs. And then state-specific grants for education. Oftentimes there's special endowments or specific grants just for that state. So again, something you'll have to look up, but definitely something that I can help you kind of direct you in the right direction. But again, remember that with this group, with getting funds this way, there is usually a lot more legwork that you do. There's usually deadlines that you have to get it in by a certain time, and also a lot of reporting afterwards. So just always something to remember. It can be a very good avenue, but just something to remember. And then special education funding. So we have the IDEA funding that associates IEPs. We have Title I funding. Those are two avenues that your school can use to help you pay for a system like this. And then federal funding. So anything that the Department of Ed federally provides in funding, they're going to run through grants.gov. And grants.gov, if you've never been on it, it's very simple to use. You log in, you create a password, it's all free. And then you can do searches as often or as not as often as you want. And you can search Department of Ed, but you can search a lot, Health and Human Services. There are so Department of Defense, there's so many, all the federal agencies, this is where they post all of their grants. And here at Play Attention, we often do this quarterly. We're looking at searches for education and technology and things like that. So, this is definitely a tool you can use, but again, you're going to have deadlines. There's going to be lots of requirements, but definitely an avenue that might be beneficial for you. Okay. So that takes us to the end. I think I'm getting pretty close to my time, and I appreciate all of the interaction today. So one question I wanted to touch base on that got brought up, home use. Okay, so we talked about the professional system. So the professional system, we talked about the cost behind that. We do have a system that you can purchase for home use for parents or even for nonprofits. If you want to start and $24.95 is just too much for your budget right now, you can always start with our home system. And our home system, the difference between the two, you're going to get everything that you get from the professional, except instead of unlimited licenses, you're just going to get 2, okay? So you can have 2 users at any given time with your system. Now, this works really great for home users, but for nonprofits, you then have the ability to purchase individual licenses at $50 a piece. So we've had professionals and nonprofit agencies in the past start out with the home system and 2 licenses, and then purchase licenses, a couple licenses every budget cycle. So the difference in price is $700. So the home system is $1,795, okay? So the difference between the two is $700. So as a nonprofit, once you purchase 14 additional licenses, you will unlock your professional system. So definitely something that you can work towards. You still have the cognitive training, you still have the body wave armband, you still have that behavioral shaping program, and you still have that unlimited support from your personal executive functions coach. So the difference between the two is that. Let's see, Sabrina, you also had questions on board games. We really don't have any recommendations for board games. A lot of times our clients, once they start working with their personal executive functions coach, they really help them with other tools that they might use. So that's something that down the road, the personal executive functions coach will work hand in hand with you and provide other tools that might be helpful. Also on our website, we have the Coaches Corner, and there's a lot of great information there as well. Any other questions that I can answer? Okay, so that great question about how long is each session. So we recommend 1 hour of training a week, but we do recommend that 1 hour a week is broken up, okay? So for our younger students, we see that 4 15-minute sessions work best. They'll play about 2 games. And for our older students, we see that 2 30-minute sessions will work well for them. But again, definitely something you can work through with your executive functions coach, and it really is dependent on the child, but you can really make that customized for how it works for your school schedule, how it works for the student. But we do recommend 1 hour of training a week. Okay, Sabrina, so we're going to share I will send you an email at the end of this that will have the recording in there, and we'll have all of our contact information, and then we can touch base on how to share it with the school that you're looking for. And then, yeah, if your teachers want to have parents involved in the training, that's definitely up to the school. If the school wants to purchase and they want to have parents involved in the training, that's okay too. If you're a parent and you're going to purchase it and you want to have your some teachers involved, that's up to you guys. But definitely as many individuals as you would like to have trained, you can all do it in one session. Specific ages. So what we say is we recommend at least 5 years old. And we recommend at least 5 years old because there are certain things that they need to understand that's happening on the screen. And we know that happens at about 5 years old. But really, we say 5 to 105 because we really run the gamut with our clients of, children, adolescents, adults. We have a lot of adult users. So really, there's, as long as they're 5, there's really not a younger versus older that, that benefits better. The training is because they're using that body wave armband, it's going to adjust specifically to their level and their activity. So that's what makes it really customizable. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, you want to share this with your school and social worker department. So yeah, we will get that recording to you when you're done. And yes, we'll send an email with a copy of this presentation for everyone that's logged in. Oh, okay, another good question. So each professional system does come with just one body wave armband. So each system just has that one body wave armband because remember, we're doing that one-to-one coaching. Now, when we talk about multiple students and group coaching and distance coaching, then that's when we get into the iLab. So if that's something you want to discuss, go ahead, just type in iLab and we can discuss that. But when you purchase a system, yeah, it just comes with that one body wave armband. Okay. Any other questions? Here is my, but yes, you are able to track multiple students because remember, each student is going to have their own user login, right? So that student will log in with their specific user login and they'll have the body wave armband on, and Sheer Genius is going to track out all of that, all of their data specific to them. And as the coach, you'll be able to access every individual student you have. So yes, so you will be able to track multiple students with that. The iLab system, the coaches system starts out, you have to have the coaches system, it's $399. And then you have to purchase systems on top of that. So then there's an additional cost of every system you buy is $1,995. But again, something that we can talk about offline. Yes, we are always willing to give a single school a demo. I just did a demo last week with a specific school. So yes, we use Zoom conferencing for all of our demos. And so, if you're not local to our area, we're more than willing to do that conferencing. We'll do that consultation, and that's all free. So, it takes about an hour. You can have as many individuals as you are there, and we'll talk specifically about your school, how it will work, and we'll go through the whole system. So you'll be, as a parent, you would be the coach. If your teacher had a question, would they be the coach or would someone else be coaching me with the system? So as a home user, you're going to be the coach for your student, for your child. In a school setting, you can have multiple different coaches. So you can have teachers, paraprofessionals, counselors, parent volunteers. So there's a lot of different individuals that could be. Now you'll have access to that personal executive functions coach. So you'll be able to help them, or they'll be able to help you if you have any additional questions. Their support's unlimited, but you're going to be doing the one-on-one training with the student yourself. Okay, I have a question about Common Core. Jason, we'll touch base about Common Core because, everybody's Common Core, all the states' Common Cores are different. So you and I can talk about that later offline. We'll have a one-to-one about what your specific, because I think you're based in California. So Jason, you and I can talk about your Common Core and what it looks like and kind of help you show how it aligns with that. Okay, any other questions I could answer? Yeah, we'll talk, and then Arnita, we can talk about state standards as well. Go ahead. I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and follow up with you on that. And when we get in, like I said, just like with grants, when we start getting into state specific standards, we can talk offline about those, definitely. So I'll write your information down, and we can touch base about that. Okay. Any other questions I could answer? Did I miss anything? If I missed your question, we'll run through them again and just double check. And if I happen to miss your question, we can go ahead and we'll make sure that we follow up with that as well. So my contact information is on the screen now. So you can always reach me at my email address. Again, we're going to follow up with an email as well that will have the recording in there, and we'll have just some follow-up information. But again, anybody that's asked for any additional information, we'll make sure you get that as well, whether you wanted a demo or you wanted the tough study or the blog or any of those things. We'll definitely make sure that we get this information out to you. So I really appreciate all of you being here today. And again, we look forward to working with all of you and really helping, build that school success. So have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again.